Okay, let's get started. Good morning to our colleagues in China and good evenings to our colleagues in the US. Welcome to today's webinar on reducing methane emission in agriculture in California and China. My name is John Lin. I'm a scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin, let me share a couple of housekeeping notes. This event is being simultaneously translated in Chinese, so please select the language you would like to hear using the globe icon at the base of your screen, and select the appropriate language. Second, this discussion is being recorded and will later be available on the California China Climate Institute's website and YouTube channels. Throughout today's discussion, if you would like to direct any questions to our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the base of your screen at any time. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Methane is a short-lived greenhouse gas with more than 80 times the climate impact of CO2 over 20 years in the atmosphere. Reducing methane emission is considered critical in limiting temperature rise in the near term. Globally, about 150 countries have joined the Global Methane Pledge with the goal of reducing global methane emission by 30% by 2030. The US and China have affirmed their commitment to reducing methane emission in their joint Glasgow Declaration on enhanced climate action. Agriculture is the leading source of methane emission in both countries. Livestock operation, including dairy and beef cattle and other animals, generate over 1/3 of the overall methane emission in the US and over 1/2 the methane emission in California. It is also a major source of emission in China. Rice cultivation is an important source of methane emission in both California and China. California has established a first-in-the-nation methane emission reduction target for dairy and livestock sectors. Many policies and programs are conducted to achieve that target. China has also announced at COP27 it will release its National Methane Action Plan by end of the year, and is still considering devising policy for agriculture methane emissions. LBL and CCCI have done some initial assessment and identified a 20% mitigation potential by 2030 for agriculture methane emissions in China, and a 35% reduction potentials for all methane emissions in China. This report is available on CCCI's website. Tonight, we have 5 distinguished panelists from the US and China. Let me introduce them first. Ms. Mei-An Chen is a program director at Innovative Green Development Program in Beijing. Her research focuses on climate change policy analysis and database development, carbon markets, and non-CO2 greenhouse gas emission mitigation. Mei-An holds a PhD in political science from University of Oregon. Roberta Franco works as a senior environmental scientist at the California Department of Food and Agriculture on the methane reduction program. She oversees 4 programs that have the goal of reducing methane emission from California agriculture operations, with a focus on dairy and livestock facilities. She has a PhD and a master's from UC Davis and a bachelor's in agronomic engineering from University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Mr. Jeffrey Coronado brings over a decade of expertise as an environmental economist and policymaker. He has served as part of the California Air Resource Board's methane cap and trade program and leads on several compliance offset protocols, including mine methane capture, livestock, and rice. Mr. Coronado has been with CARB since 2013 and previously worked at Cal EPA. Professor Niu Kun Yu is Associate Professor at the Institute of Agricultural Economics and Development at Chinese Academy Agricultural Sciences. Her research interests include agricultural resource and environmental economics, agricultural carbon emissions reduction, and green agricultural development policies. For closing remark, we have Caitlin Frederick, who is a research associate at the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development in Washington, D.C., is a founding co-chair of the Fast Action on Climate to Ensure Intergenerational Justice initiative. Her research includes mitigation of methane and other short-lived climate pollutants, particularly in hard-to-abate sectors such as waste and agriculture. So we will first have Mei-Ann Chen to start.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lin Jiang, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Mei-Ann from Innovative Green Development Program, a China-based consultancy focused on the design and implementation of low-carbon solutions. Low-carbon solutions, and today in our today's presentation, I'm going to talk about methane emissions in general, and then focus on the methane mitigation potentials in China. As the second largest greenhouse gas, methane actually can play a very important role in addressing climate change, as mentioned before. So, in general, so methane. So here, actually, currently, methane actually already accounts for more than around like 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and its key emission sources, including from energy sector and waste sector, and also agricultural sector. So if we look at this pie chart, actually, the largest emission source for the methane emissions is from the agriculture, especially in the livestock management and also the rice cultivation. So in the livestock management, methane emissions are mainly from the enteric fermentation and the manure management. And the enteric fermentation are usually refers to the chemical process that happened in a lot of ruminants when they digest the food. So if we look at the agricultural methane emissions by different regions, actually we can see some difference at a global level. Actually, livestock actually are the largest emission source, and followed by the rice cultivation. However, that actually become more obvious in the Europe and in the US. However, in China, actually, rice cultivation also is a large emission source for the methane. So we also saw there are a lot of like different mitigation measures in the agricultural sectors. For example, for the enteric fermentation, we saw mitigation measures including like selective breeding, or provide different feed additives, and also to provide high quality forage, and for the manure management, we saw like mitigation measures including like biogas recovery, and also to change the manure the way to manure storage, such as decrease manure storage time, or improve the manure storage covering, and also the housing systems. And for the rice, to address methane emissions in the rice cultivations, there are mitigation measures such as the water management, or like to provide or develop some low emission rice varieties. So in addition to these different mitigation measures from the supply side, we also saw mitigation measures from the demand side. For example, like the dietary shift but because it refers to relates to behavior change, so it's not easy to take some actions. And also to what extent do these mitigation measures can reduce methane emissions also depend on a lot of other factors such as policy and economic incentives and also the behavior change. So here we actually developed some preliminary analysis to understand the mitigation potentials in China's agricultural sector. So currently, the agricultural sector's GHG emissions accounts for 11% of China's total emissions in 2014, according to the official data. So if we look at the GHG emissions by gas, methane actually already accounts for more than 39% of its total emissions in China's agricultural sectors. And of course, key emission sources including entire fermentations and rice cultivations, and also some from the manure management. There are also some driving factors for China's agricultural methane emissions. And so, for example, with their economic development, people's income increases. Actually, they might want to have more options for food consumptions. One is their animal-based food consumptions. So for the last two decades, China's animal-based food consumption actually has been increasing over time. If we look at the chart in the middle, however, compared to China's animal-based food consumption with other developed countries such as US, Germany, and Japan, actually China's animal-based food consumption remains a little bit lower than these countries. So which means in the near future, this consumption could continue to grow. So that's why we think China's agriculture's methane emissions might have room to grow. So here we actually had some calculation to estimate China's agriculture's GHG emissions trend by sectors and by gas. So if we look at this chart, the blue bar actually represents the methane emissions from the entire fermentation. From this chart, actually, we can see it's going to be continue to grow. And if we look at the GHG emissions by gas, the largest emission source will be the methane, especially in 2050. Methane actually accounts for a large percent of its total GHG emissions in China's agricultural sector. So here we actually currently there are a lot. China actually already implemented a lot of policies. Those policies actually can reduce GHG emissions, including methane emissions in China's agricultural sector. So here we listed some key policies China has released for the last decade. Some policies, for example, we have policies to try to use resource utilization of livestock manure. And so these set targets and also provide subsidies. China also mentioned to reduce the cropland methane reduction, that actually including to reduce methane emissions from in the rice paddies. Okay, and also we have policies to promote high quality forage development. And the good news is actually China just released the first comprehensive agricultural climate change action plan. And in this plan, it listed priority areas China is going to focus on for addressing climate change. One including methane emissions reduction for the rice cultivations, and also listed some low carbon actions in the livestock management. But even with a lot of these policies, but these policies need to in line with China's other policy priorities, for example, the food security and rural revitalizations. So based on current China's existing policies, for example, as I mentioned before, they have control methane emissions from farmland and also resource utilization of livestock manure and also the forage development. So based on these policies, we listed some practice for methane reduction. For example, the water management or develop some rice varieties. Excuse me. And for the forage development, they can have some the practice they can develop, including like manage feeding strategies or add feed additives. Based on these policies and practice, we actually developed a scenario analysis trying to understand the emission reduction potentials in China's agriculture. So this is the mitigation potentials by gas, and here this is the mitigation potential by sector, by different emission sources. So in this chart, actually, we can see a lot of mitigation potentials from methane. And here is mainly from the enteric fermentation. Here in this table, we listed a lot of detailed mitigation actions that can be promoted in our analysis. And also, we took these mitigation actions into consideration in our scenario analysis, that including biogas recovery, water management, and the promotion of dry directed seeding, and also using feed additives. And one special measure we take into consideration is the dietary shift, so which is really hard to implement. But if we can take this into consideration, or if we can if that can be implemented like successfully, that can have a lot of mitigation potential. So this here we come up with some mitigation principle. Probably not, we probably not see it as a policy suggestion, but more like mitigation principles. So we think the realization of deep mitigation potentials actually requires a lot of policy, technical, and financial support. And the first principle we think it's very important to unlock mitigation potential in the livestock management. As we saw before, the livestock production actually has a lot of mitigation potentials, and China actually already have some policies that can support this, for example, in the manure management, and also to provide high quality forage. So by enhancing these existing actions can bring a lot of mitigation potentials. And the second principle is to create some economic incentives for mitigation technology scale up. Because a lot of mitigation technologies actually at this current stage are pretty expensive. So especially it might not easy and costly for people to take these mitigation technologies. So that'd be great if they can have some economic incentives to support that. And the third one is to promote consumer behavior change. As we mentioned before, the dietary shift actually have a lot of mitigation effects, but we need to figure out proper interventions that can shape people's behavior. The last principle is about technical training or capacity buildings. Actually, in China, we have a lot of smallholder farmers. Actually, China's whole farmland is dominated by smallholder farms. So it will be very important to engage those smallholder farmers with some management programs and some training programs to engage them with the mitigation actions. Thank you. So we actually also released some papers about agricultural mitigation, agricultural emissions reductions, and you can go to our website to get more details. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chen, for that very comprehensive analysis and overview on China's policy on that. Next, I think we have Roberta to talk about the California experience.
Yes, thank you. Let me share my slides with you. I believe this is the one. Can you see my slides well?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Ling. I'm Roberta Franco. I work for the California Department of Food and Ag. And today I'll be talking about addressing California livestock methane emissions in California. First of all, I'll start talking about livestock, and in terms of methane emission, pretty much it comes from two sources. One is comes from the dairy cattle, and another is from beef cattle. So I just wanted to show you some statistics about these two industries to give you an idea why they are so important when we are talking about methane emissions, and what can be done in the current scenario. So in terms of dairies, in California, we actually are the #1 dairy states in the dairy state in the United States. We produce about 19% of the fluid milk in the United States, and that is actually higher for other dairy products. This fluid milk and other dairy products are produced by about 1.7 million milking cows, and they are distributed across 1,250 dairies across the state. Last year, this dairy and dairy products have generated about $6.3 billion in direct sales, and that is not considering all the indirect generation and the jobs that come from this industry itself. One thing that I wanted to point out, and I put here in my slides, is that milk and milk products are highly nutritious, safe, and affordable food sources for children and adults. And it definitely, the dairy sector, at least here in California, plays an important role in the local, national, international food security. So a little bit more on the dairy and dairy products is that we see that even with the rise of dairy alternative products, we see an increase in consumption of dairy and dairy products. So here you can see that is rising actually pretty substantially. And I even put butter here because it's one of the most uptrend increase. And so this kind of in the message of this slide is that the trend is still going up and does not seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. Another slide here that I wanted to share with you, it's a slide that has the dairy herd size in California across the years and the milk production also across the years. So you can see that across the years, the herd size has been decreasing, and this is about 1 to 1.5 decrease on the herd size every year since 2009, which was the highest herd size in California. And however, the milk production has been increasing across the years. So what that means is we have less animals producing more milk, and per unit of milk, that is less greenhouse gases, less feed, less water. So we are becoming more efficient and more productive as the years pass. And just for you to have an idea, we produce about 225% more milk than we used to in 1964. So now about the other industry. So we have the beef industry in California, which is also very strong. We are the #5 beef state in the country. We have approximately 680,000 beef cows, and that does not include calves and other replacements. These animals are taken care or are present in 13,694 cattle ranches across the state, and and they occupy approximately 38 million acres of private or public rangelands. They have produced, or sales generated were about $3.1 billion last year. So, however, I have shared very exciting data on the past slides. We cannot ignore the fact that agriculture is an important source of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So in this slide, I'm showing you the California greenhouse gas inventory from the 2022 edition, published by our sister agents, the California Air Resource Board. And you can see that agriculture represents 9% of the total greenhouse gas inventory in California. And so this is about 31.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. As you can see then, inside of the agriculture and forestry portion of it, it breaks down that most of our greenhouse gases coming from agriculture and forestry are related to manure management, enteric fermentation, and ag soil management. Rice cultivation, actually, which my colleague Jeffrey will talk more, it represents only 2% of the greenhouse gas inventory in California. So of manure management and enteric fermentation, which I'm focusing here today, and that's definitely due to the methane emission related to these two sectors, they represent about 72 of the total agricultural emission. Of the enteric fermentation, which is 35% or 10.99 million metric tons, about 96% comes from cattle, so beef and dairy cattle. Of that 96%, 28% come from beef cattle in California, and the remaining, the 72% remaining, comes from dairy cattle. So you can see how dairy, it's a really heavy portion of the enteric fermentation here in California. In the case of manure management, which is another big percentage, about 2.5% of the manure management come from other animals other than cattle. Of the remaining, 3.7 comes from beef cattle, and 94% of the manure management comes from dairy cattle. So that's why you'll see us here in California, when we talk about methane, we usually will focus on the dairy industry, because that for us represents the biggest emission of methane. So this is for you to see how very different California is different from the rest of the United States. This is completely a different scenario around the United States. Like usually enteric fermentation will be largely the highest greenhouse gas emission portion, and also it is not dairy, it will be beef cattle, the major producer of methane. So to address methane emission, the state of California has approached this through two ways. So one is through legislation. So here I'm showing you 3 of the main legislation affecting greenhouse gas in California. So very briefly, the first one was Assembly Bill 32, passed in 2016, that sought to have a reduction of 20% of greenhouse gases from the 1990 levels by 2020. We successfully met that, and then our legislature expanded by passing Senate Bill 32, which increased the goal to 40% reductions below levels of 1990 by 2030. And we are still on track on that, but we still have a lot to accomplish to meet that goal. And in the case of livestock specifically and methane, we have Senate Bill 1383, which was passed in 2016, which is the first target or the first regulation in the world or legislation in the world to seek reduction of methane, that set a target for reduction of methane from livestock. So this, in the case of livestock, we have this regulation seeks to achieve a reduction of 40% of methane emission below 2013 levels by 2030. And it is possible that if the California Air Resource Board, in consultation with CDFA, sees that regulations are necessary to meet that goal, they can come in. They can actually start from starting from 2024 and or beyond. However, the state also approached methane emission through voluntary measures, and this is what I would like to focus the rest of my presentation on. So in our department, we have 2 incentive programs: the Alternative Manure Management Program, the AMP, and the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program, the DDRDP, which I'll be speaking in more details in the next slides. So they incentivize the reduction of manure management methane emission through the implementation of dairy digesters or non-digester based approaches. So that will depend, digester, although very effective in capturing and destroying methane or repurposing the biomethane, you still have farms that, due to their location or due to high costs or due to their preference, would like not to have a digester. So we have the Alternative Manure Management Program that provide that. And incentive for funding for enteric fermentation mitigation strategy is still not part of the incentive programs of the state, but we are soon to release a program, the California Livestock Methane Measurement Mitigation and Thriving Environment Program, the CLIMATE, that will offer funds to research enteric fermentation mitigation strategies and other mitigation strategies that we are not aware, or that is a lack of data on it. So it's just important that we are going to fund those practices that are cost effective and also feasible. So on the next slides, I will break down on the programs that we have funded and have been funding so far. So the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program has started in 2014 and still awarding until of this day. So since 2014, we have awarded $213.72 million to the implementation of dairy digesters across California. These grants nowadays are up to $1.6 million per piece, and we have a requirement that of 50% of matching funds. So we have funded so far 131 digesters. Those digesters are right now providing a reduction of 2.3 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year in reduction. And because of this matching fund requirement and also the interest of the industry, we have leveraged $432 million in matching funds. So here I put it on the slide some co-benefits that this program offer, but I won't talk about them now. So here's just a map on how these projects are divided or spread across California. As you can see, where actually is the highest concentration of dairies in the state is the Central Valley, and also where the digesters are mostly located. So right now we have 13 RNG clusters and 12 independent projects, which include electric generation projects too. Here are some pictures of our projects. So this is a renewable fuel station, one of the covered lagoon digesters that we have funded, and a carbon dioxide removal equipment on the cluster upgrading facility. We also have our Alternative Manure Management Program, which since 2017 has awarded $18.9 million to 142 projects across California. These grants are up to $750,000 apiece, and this program also offers technical assistance providers to help farmers to not only apply for the program, but also help them manage the grant once they have been awarded. This program is resulting in a reduction of 260,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, and we have leveraged $20 million in matching funds, and that's not a requirement of this program. Here, I don't have the projects for 2022 yet, but just to show you how these projects are more spread throughout the state of California and are everywhere in small and large dairies. And here are some pictures of the projects that we have funded. So this is a solid separator project. The middle pictures are the compost bedded pack barn. Here on the right top, it's a vacuum truck. And on the bottom is a conversion from flush to scrape to reduce so all this practice to reduce the anaerobic environment that would result in the production of methane. So my last slide is to show that these two programs so far, just, the CDFA side of things have provided a reduction of 8.1% of the total greenhouse gas emissions from the California agriculture and forestry sector. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. And I really would like to thank my team for all that they have done so far. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Frankel, for that really detailed description of the different measures and technology and programs. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for you later on. Next, we're gonna go to Jeffrey from CARB.
Hello, thank you for your time. Let me pull up my slides, screen share, there we go. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, I apologize for my camera wasn't working, so sorry for not having the camera, but thank you to everyone for the opportunity. It's a great honor and good to see everybody. So I'm going to talk today about the rice cultivation project, our protocol, compliance offset protocol. So the California Air Resources Board issues ARB offset credits to qualifying projects that reduce or sequester greenhouse gases pursuant to 6 board-approved compliance offset protocols, the RICE protocol being one of these. Compliance offsets are tradable credits that represent verified GHG emissions reductions or removal enhancements from sources not subject to a compliance obligation in the cap and trade program. In addition to their climate and other environmental benefits, offset credits provide important cost containment and compliance flexibility for covered entities. So under the cap and trade program, covered entities may use compliance offset credits to satisfy a small percentage of their overall compliance obligation. This percentage, called the quantitative usage limit, applies to each individual covered or opt-in covered entity for each compliance period. Compliance entities may use ARB offset credits to meet up to 4% of their compliance obligation for emissions from 2021 to 2025, excuse me, and 6% for emissions from 2026 to 2030. Starting with the 2021 emissions, no more than 1/2 of the quantitative usage limit may be sourced from projects that do not provide direct environmental benefits to the state of California. Each credit is 1 metric ton, and to date, the California Air Resources Board has issued over 218 million compliance offset credits and 24 million in our early action program. The early action program has ended. So now emission reductions achieved by offset projects must meet rigorous criteria to be approved as a valid compliance instrument. Offsets must be real, additional, permanent, quantifiable, verifiable, and enforceable. I have these definitions, and I'm not going to read through all of them because they're quite long and for the sake of time, but they are in our cap and trade regulations, section 95801, and they are on my notes that I've made available. So there are 6 major rice producing states, including California, the Gulf coasts of Louisiana and Texas, and the Mississippi Delta, primarily in Arkansas, but also extending to Missouri and Mississippi. Common rice cultivation practices differ geographically. As such, it is important to tailor suitable compliance practices based on geographic location and business's usual farming practices. With that in mind, staff identified 2 compliance practices for the California rice growing region: switching from wet seeding to dry seeding and early drainage in preparation for harvest. And 2 compliance practices for the Mid-South states: cycling wetting and drying of the rice field. Primary effect of the protocol is reduction of methane emissions due to reduced organic decomposition as a result of reduced flooding.
Excuse me, Jeffrey.
Yes, sir.
Are you advancing your slides?
Yes, I
This
am.
mean- Okay, somehow we are stuck on the first slide still.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Let me.
Now it's moving. Good. Now we're on slide 4.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. I will just keep it with the notes on there, and that way you can see
Okay.
it. My sincere apologies. Real,
No problem.
additional, and then the 6 majors. So we can all see 4.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm on to 5. Sorry about that. So all greenhouse gas sources, sinks, and reservoirs within the bold line are included and must be accounted for under this protocol. So each protocol that we have boundaries for what's in the project. And then I have also definitions to each one of these provided in the notes that I submitted, and they're available online. Any increased GHG emissions as a result of implementing a project must be debited from total project primary source emission reductions. And any decreased GHG emission as a result of implementing a project is not eligible for crediting, and the total secondary source emission increase for the project must be set to 0. So now all reductions must be fully documented and accurately quantified. The protocol requires the use of it's called the DNDC, the denitrification decomposition biogeochemical process model, to quantify changes in N2O and methane emissions due to eligible practices. Now the SSURGO database contains information about soil as collected by the National Cooperative Soil Survey over the course of a century. The StatsGo2 is a broad-based inventory of soils and non-soil areas that occur in a repeatable pattern on the landscape. The SURGO database means Soil Survey Geographic Database, and the StatGo database means State Soil Geographic Database. The DNDC model must be populated with climate, soil, and cropping data for the applicable rice fields within the project. Now, if the organic content of a field is available through a laboratory testing as specified in subchapter 3.1 A6D3, this is of the protocol, the tested soil sample results must be used. If a laboratory tested sample result is unavailable, the organic content of a field must be determined using the SSURGO data posted on ARB's Rice Protocol Resources website. If I'd like to just say the SSURGO data is not available, the StatsGo2 data posted on ARB's Rice Protocol Resources website must be used. If neither of these are available, one of the following methods must be chosen to determine the characteristics. They must use a government soil database, a state university published soil database, or soil samples may be taken to determine the soil parameters. For a participating field, soil samples must be taken per USDA's Soil Quality Test Kit Guide, published July 2001, and tested by a USDA APHIS inspected facility authorized to receive soil. Each verification team must include an agronomic expert with one of the following qualifications: an agronomist with at least 5 years of direct professional experience in rice cultivation, or a local or state agricultural cooperative rice farming advisor. I have also added some web pages. The first, just my contact. If anybody out there has questions they'd like to send, I could steer you in the right direction. The second is the compliance offset program that lists all our protocols. And then I gave a direct link to our protocols, our 6 different protocols, and a link to our cap and trade regulation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for that very detailed description of the offset protocol, and we'll come back to you for a more detailed question later. Next, we have a Professor Niu.
好的，谢谢林老师。各位专家学者，下午好。现在我共享一下我的 PPT。好的，今天我分享的题目是中国的水稻减排。那么这个是我的一个汇报的大纲。首先也是简单的介绍一下中国的这个水稻种植的甲烷的排放的情况。那么刚才其实李安博士也介绍了中国的水稻的甲烷的这个排放量占到了中国的农业活动甲烷排放量一个相当大的比例。那么这个比例是远高于这个全球的平均水平的。那么我们也是收集了这个 FAO 的从1990年到2020年的一个中国农业碳排放的一个数据的情况。我们也是发现在FAO 的数据，它是采用这个国家的温室气体这个 IPCC 国家温室气体排放清单的第1级方法来测算的。那么这幅图呢是3种主要类型的一个温室气体的一个排放结构的变化。我们也可以看出，对于农业活动来讲的话，的确是这个甲烷排放它的占比是最高的。那么从1990年的时候，农业的甲烷排放大概是占到了一个55%这样一个比例。那么到了2020年，这个比例是48%， 稍微有一些下降，但是仍然是3种气体里面排放最高的。那么这个也是对比了一个90年到20年各个农业活动的它一个那个甲烷排放的一个比例的情况。我们看到这个90年的时候，这个水稻种植的这个甲烷排放的比例是大概是43%，然后2020年水稻种植的甲烷排放的占比是在39%这样一个比例。那么这个是中国和世界的一个对比。我们可以看到这个在从1990年到2021年，中国的水稻的总产量是上升了12%，然后中国水稻的种植面积是下降了9.5%，而中国水稻的甲烷的排放总量按照这个 FAO 的统计，它是下降了9%。那么中国水稻的甲烷的排放量占全球的水稻甲烷的排放量的比重，大概是在90年的时候是26%这样一个比例，那么在2020年是占到了22.5%这样一个比例。那么这个是中国的生产每吨的水稻所产生的甲烷排放和全球的平均水平的一个对比。我们可以看到这个上面这个红色的是全球的一个平均水平的一个状况，下面这个蓝色的是中国的一个情况。我们可以看到那个从这个产均的甲烷碳排放来看的话，中国的生产1吨的水稻的产均碳排放是在不断的稍微小幅的下降的，而且它这个产均碳排放的强度是低于全球的一个平均水平的。大概现在在2020年生产1吨的这个水稻，大概平均是要产生0.698吨的二氧化碳当量的一个甲烷排放。那么这个是单位面积的一个排放强度的一个变化趋势。我们看到，如果按面积单位每公顷的这个水稻甲烷的排放来看的话，中国是要高于这个全球的一个平均水平的，大概每公顷是产生4.8到4.9吨的这样一个二氧化碳排放当量的甲烷排放。那么上面这个是中国的一个那个排放。那么第二个我就是讲一下那个中国的一些应对措施。那么中国的对于水稻甲烷的应对的策略来讲的话，我就简单可以归结为以下5个方面。一个就是那个技术推广，第二个就是探索一些补偿的政策，第三个就是构建一个甲烷排放的监测体系，第四个就是探索这个碳交易，第5个就是国际合作。那么首先那个在技术推广方面，也是在今年2020年，中国的农业农村部发布了这个农业农村减排固碳的实施方案。在这个方案中提出了一些那个农业农村的温室气体减排的具体的行动方案，其中也是把这个稻田甲烷的减排行动列为是10大重大行动的首位，就首先要稻的一个减排行动。那么其中也是提出了就是说那个那么稻田甲烷减排的重点主要是要提出要强化这个稻田的水分管理，推广这个稻田节水灌溉技术，并培育和推广这个高产低碳的水稻品种。因为中国它始终是重视这个粮食安全， 所以就是说中国它在这个推广这个稻田甲烷减排的时候，它始终是把这个高产低碳这个研发这样一个水稻品种作为是优先的一个手段。另外，在今年11月份，就是中国发布的这个落实国家自主贡献目标进展报告里面，也提到了一些那个中国的水稻甲烷减排的一些成效吧，就是其中就是提到就是中国目前正在推广的这个节水抗旱稻，它可以实现1亩稻田甲烷排放降低90%到95%。那么目前这个品种已经在中国的安徽省、湖北省、浙江省和海南省，这些地方种植面积，大概在20万公顷里面这样一个水平。那么此外，可能还有一些那个这个私人部门和政府的研发机构的一些合作，比如说这个阿里云和这个中国水稻研究所的一些合作，比如说他们合作研发了这个低碳稻作技术，在这个浙江的嘉善县的西塘镇独小会，那么这个规模大概是126公顷左右。那么引入这个低碳稻作技术，它也产生了很大的这个减排的成效，大概1亩的稻田的甲烷排放可以降低6公斤左右。那么按照这个甲烷和二氧化碳当量1比2.25这样一个比例，大概能够减少这个150公斤的二氧化碳排放当量这样一个比例。所以就是这个中国水稻研究者他也在预测，如果说这个在这个长江三角洲大概1.2亿亩的水稻田推广开来的话，可以减少大概1800万吨的二氧化碳当量的温室气体排放。那么这个是技术推广的一个情况。那么第二个就是中国政府也在尝试探索这种补偿政策，比如说在今年2月份的时候，农业农村部也是发布了这个推进生态农场建设的指导意见，其中也是首次提出了要针对这个稻田的甲烷的减排来探索一套这个生态农业的低碳补偿政策。另外在这个监测体系的建设方面，也是在这个刚才说的这个农业农村的减排负碳实施方案里面，专门提到了要开展这个碳减排的监测体系的建设行动，提出要布置这个稻田等农用地的这个监测点位，要推动这个监测评价体系的优化，来开展这个甲烷等温室气体排放的定位监测。另外就是要探索这个温室气体的自愿减排项目，来纳入这个碳交易市场。也是在这个2021年9月的时候，中国国务院发布了关于深化生态保护补偿制度改革的意见。那么其中就提出了，就是说要将这个包括甲烷利用在内的温室气体减排的自愿项目呢，要尝试纳入这个全国的碳排放权交易市场。那么在这个意见发布以后的今年的9月份，中国的福建省也是首次的完成了一个尝试，就是完成了全国首单的一个农业的碳汇交易。那么这个交易的项目大概覆盖了600公顷的稻田，那么它就是根据这个稻田减少甲烷排放的一个方法学，那么经过这个科学的监测和测算，来实现了这个试点项目每年可以减少甲烷排放大概是0.23万吨的二氧化碳排放当量这么一个水平。那么这个项目主要是总共是持续了3年，共是完成了减排 0.7万吨的一个二氧化碳当量的一个减排量。那么最后一个就是国际合作。那么其实刚才林老师也介绍了，就是在去年的 COP26 的大会上，中美达成了一个那个联合宣言。那么这个宣言的最大亮点就是双方在这个加大这个行动控制和减少甲烷排放方面达成了一个共识。那么在接下来的10年内，中美也将合作的加强这个甲烷排放的监测、管理和研究。中国也将制定一份全面的有力度的甲烷减排的国家行动计划。那么最后就是说一下这个目前存在的问题，一个就是这个目前这个甲烷减排的一个协同机制还是比较缺乏的。那么刚才也提到了，就是中国那个它现在在致力于研发这个水稻的一个高产低碳的品种。那么其实就是这个在很多专家也发现了，就是在不同的这个水稻的产量就在水稻的产量差异不大的情况下，甲烷排放的差异其实是非常显著的。但是呢，目前其实在那个研究层面上存在一些问题，比如说目前研究这种高产的水稻的，它并不关注这个减排固碳的问题，而研究这个减排固碳的，它不关心这个产量下降的问题。因此，我们也是呼吁能够建立起一个这种跨学科的跨部门的一个协作机制，能把这个水稻的这个高产和低碳能够就是加以协同。另外呢，还有一些那个协同方面的问题，就是那么其实中国它实施这个农业绿色发展政策已经很多年了。那么实际上这个农业的绿色发展政策，它基本上也是在正向的促进这个农业的这个温室气体减排。比如说中国实施的一些这个化肥农药的减量政策，它在一定程度上它也促进了这个农业的一个那个温室气体的下降。但是也存在一些负系统的措施，比如说现行的一些政策，它推行这个秸秆还田。那么大家知道，在这个淹水的条件下，这个稻草的还田，它还是会增加这个甲烷排放。所以就是说，在有些方面，它还存在一些负系统的效应。那么接下来可能就是怎么样来实现这个将来这个农业的绿色发展的政策跟这个农业的这个温室气体减排政策一个加强的协同。那么第二个就是这个在中国的一些那个基层政府、生产主体和农户对于这个农业的减排固碳的方面还存在一些认知的差距。比如说过去我们是对这个农业的绿色发展，比如说这个化肥减量这些的认识比较多，但是可能对于这种稻田的甲烷排放这些可能宣传的还比较少，农户在这方面认知也有一定的差距。那么接下来就是如何加强这个农户的认知和接受程度，对于将来这个农业的这个减排固碳是非常的重要。那么第三个就是市场激励不足的问题，也就目前其实我们在说这个农业的减排固碳的时候，主要还是着眼于这个社会效益的考虑，这个经济效益的激励是明显不足的。比如说国家那个现在目前的刚才谈到的一个自愿减排的交易通道，其实还没有正式的开放，所以在这方面也会影响这个农业的一个减排的一个动力。那么第四个就是经营规模小的问题。刚才我在评论区也看到了一些嘉宾的提问，就是也是在说这个农业尤其是中国的南方的一些省份，它的这个水稻的这个面积是非常小的，可能是就是1亩2亩的这种情况很多。那么这种情况也会就是一定程度上制约这种水稻的甲烷排放的一个减少的一个效果。比如说因为这种它可能缺乏这种技术的一个规模效益，另外就是可能有一些那个好的一些减排技术和监测技术， 它很难在这种小规模的农业上面实施，那么很难做到这种精准的减排。那么其实就是刚才那个嘉宾也提到，就是想办法的增加这个规模，或者还有这种方法，就是说发明一些适用于这种小规模农业的这种减排和监测技术。那么这个也是就是可以达到这个农业碳减排的一个途径吧。我就简单的汇报这么几点，谢谢。
Well, thank you, Professor Niu, for that excellent summary and overview of China's rice research program. We know China has done extensive research on rice. We'd love to learn more from you. So now we are into our Q&A section. So please enter your question on the Q&A box. Let me just start by asking Professor Niu a question of clarification. 牛老师，刚才你也提到了这个稻田的秸秆还田呢，有可能引起一些负的作用，就是增加了甲烷的排放。我看到你前面的这个片子里面也提到了，有这个稻秆还田，有这个增收和减排的这个效益啊，而且效益都是很显著的。你能不能稍微澄清一下这两之间的这个这个不同的数字之间的反应？第二的话呢，就是我知道中国过去的这个农业技术推广是有一套非常完整的系统，不知道现在这种技术的推广和这种疑难问题的处理是通过什么样的机制来推动？
谢谢林老师的提问。那么就是那个这个稻田的这个产量的提高跟这个它一个那个减排，它一个排放强度的下降，这个就是其实也是中国很多学者他就是在那个就是研究的一个成果吧，就是我也在很多的会议上就听到很多这种就是他专门研究这种水稻减排的这个技术的专家，他们也在提这个就是这个增产和这个减排之间的一个问题，就是一般来讲的话，它这个产量越高的话，它这个单位产量的这样一个那个甲烷的排放会降低。就像刚才那个就是研究那个畜牧的专家，他提到的就是说这个现在的那个奶牛的排放，它也是就是它那个单位的那个，因为它那个产量的下降，意味着它这个就一个奶牛它的那个就是这个甲烷的排放量，它在下降的这个道理是一样的，就是而且就是从那个刚才我汇报的那个就是那个趋势上面也能看到，就是从这个1990年到那个2020年，它这个就是这个水稻的产量，中国的水稻的产量，它是一个大概增加了10%这样一个水平。那么这个产量增加的同时，它也是带来一个那个就是那个甲烷排放的一个总量的一个降低。那么这个就是就是也是很多那个就是专家他也是在证实的。所以说这个中国它目前就是因为它农业部它始终它第一要为它是要保证这个粮食安全，所以就是说目前就是它把这个增产和减排这样一个协同放在这个技术就是技术研发的一个首位。那么这个是我对第一个问题的回答。那么第二个就是在这个技术就是技术的推广方面的话，就目前还是通过一些那个就刚才我汇报的这个一个就是那个政企的一个合作，或者有一些那个研究机构它跟企业的一个合作，就通过这种目前我看到还是通过这种项目的实施这样一个推广，比如说政府它可能会提供一些那个项目的补贴，然后在某个地方实施这个试点，然后试点成熟的话，再进行这样一个那个大规模的一个推广，这样一个方式那个推广这个水稻甲烷的技术。谢谢，这是我的一个回答。
好，牛老师，谢谢你。 你刚才说的10%的产量提高是指单位产量提高10%是吧？
就是这个是我在 FAO 的收集的数据，就是它是从1990到2020年，中国的水稻的总产量它是上升了12%，
OK，
然后水稻的种植面积是下降了9.5%，然后它的甲烷排放量下降了9%，这样一个。
好，谢谢。Are there any questions from our audience? I see one coming through their remediation effort to reduce emissions through decrease on the demand side of dairy or beef. I assume that's a question to both our Chinese and American colleagues. So probably Dr. Franco and Dr. Chen, you can take that. Who want to go first?
Dr. Cheng, you want to go? You can go first, and mine is very short of answer.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. I can go first about the demand side policies. As we mentioned in the slides, we actually did take a look at the influence of the dietary shift on the methane emissions reduction. It can have a large mitigation potential. So this dietary shift means if people are all keep like a very healthy diet, for example, they can use like the planetary they have there is a healthy diet recommended by the Lancet, and also in China, Chinese Nutrition Society also recommended set up dietary guidelines. If people are all follow this kind of like guidelines to develop a healthy diet, that can reduce a lot of to have like a favorable like a suitable animal-based food intake, so that actually can reduce a lot of methane emissions. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's my answer. Yeah.
In our case, at least on the level of the California Department of Food and Ag, we don't have anything on the sense of regulating what people their choices and their nutritional options, but we do want to incentivize the increase of sustainability in all food systems and all. Yeah, that would be my answer for now.
I have a sort of follow-up question for both of you. Dr. Franco, in your presentation, you mentioned there are a fair amount of incentives, sometimes up to 50% cost co-share. What are the criteria for incentives for biodigester, for example? And a similar question for Dr. Chen, and where in China, there are also government incentive programs for biodigesters for animal operation. Do you know the level of incentive for those investments? Dr. Franco, you go first.
I can start. So yes, we do have this program, which has been very successful since 2014. And I think our main requirement is that it needs to be in a dairy farm. So that is our, since the dairy industry represents so much of the methane, we want to focus our incentives there for now. And another important requirement is that there cannot be any increase in air pollutants or any harm to the local community. And so we are very concerned, for example, that are certain electric generating from biogas that, the old technology that would produce a lot of NOx and PM 2.5. So for example, that we wouldn't accept on the program, has as one of the technologies. So I think, and we do it all through a competitive process. So applications come, we'll rank them, and we would distribute the awards as much as we can across that list of awardees.
Dr. Chen?
Yeah, I think for the biogas development in the livestock production, I think China do have some policies, especially in the rural area. They encourage their people actually to get the biogas through the anaerobic digesters, and from that generated from the manure management. So I think they have been using these policies for many years, and the government also provide some subsidies for the biogas development. Yeah.
Thank you. I have another question for Jeffrey. On the rice protocol, you mentioned this is one of the 6 protocols used in California. Are there limits on how much the offset can be used in terms of total emission requirement, the California ETS program?
I
and how much
don't
is
know.
limited to agriculture? Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't know of any limitations to receiving credits. It's pretty much on your emission reductions, what you do. And I can also speak to the livestock protocol about incentives for digesters, which is a big part of our program, because there's a lot of sunk costs to developing a digester, which Roberta can speak to, and their programs of getting it started. But once it's started, they can use the emission reductions to sell those credits and get money to help to recover some of those costs. Also, depending on how they use the methane, so if some of these farms they use generators from the methane, and that covers their electrical costs to run the farm. And then also they can upgrade it into RNG and participate in the low carbon fuel standard program, which also gives them a monetary incentive to recover costs for their initial sunk costs of building a digester, because building these digesters are quite expensive in the beginning. But through the offsets protocols, you can recover some of that money. But there are no limits on the amount of emission reductions that you can accomplish. It just depends on, how much you can reduce your emissions.
Okay. One more question to our Chinese panelists here, both Professor Niu and Dr. Chen, as we are eagerly waiting for China's national action plan. Are there any particular details and targets for agriculture sector you anticipate as a part of this program?
I mean, in terms of California, we have that target of 40% reduction of methane by 2030. So
right, I'm asking our Chinese panelists whether they anticipate some similar ambitious policies in China's upcoming National Methane Action Plan. So Professor Niu, do you have any thoughts to share? Or Dr. Chen, either one, you could comment on those.
I think actually China just in early this year, China actually released its comprehensive, it's a national action plan for climate change in the agricultural sectors. It actually listed a lot of specific actions in reducing methane emissions in the in livestock and also rice productions. So we think maybe the new national action plan might include these measures.
Thank you. Professor Niu, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
谢谢你的 提问，我觉得刚才那个陈老师的回答，我的观点跟陈老师回答是一致的。就是其实我刚才汇报的那个也是农业农村部他近期发布的一个那个关于农业农村甲烷，不是甲烷，那个农业农村那个减排固碳的一个实施方案。那么那个里面就是它是把这个水稻和畜禽的这个甲烷减排，就是那个温室气体减排是作为一个非常重要的任务。所以未来的这个甲烷减排的国家行动方案，虽然说我们现在可能还不太了解这个具体它的细节，因为这个上海的还在制定过程中，所以现在目前也没有说特别多的这个细节的透露。但是我想这个农业的这个畜禽养殖和甲烷肯定是里面一个比较重要的方面，所以我们也是拭目以待吧。
Okay, well, thank you both. Now, I think we're going to do the last section. We're going to have Caitlin to offer some closing remarks for our webinar. Caitlin?
Thank you, Dr. Lin, and thank you, the presenters today and today's host. This has been a very interesting conversation. I've learned a lot along the way, so I'm very appreciative of that. I've been given the hardest job, which is to summarize the thoughtful conversation, but here's my take. So in the beginning of our conversation, we discussed the sources of methane. In California, it is apparent from Dr. Franco that dairy cattle and beef cattle are major emitters of methane in the ag sector. And more specifically, dairy is a heavier percentage of the methane emissions. And then in China, livestock and rice are both contributors of methane emission. However, rice is on the downtrend. Enteric fermentation seems to be the major remaining source of emissions. We heard about the importance of methane as well. It's a major source of greenhouse gas emissions within the sector of both China and California, and as the overall greenhouse gas emissions. We also talked about dietary shifts, which is a very interesting section of the conversation, and food security. We heard that China has an upward trend of animal-based food consumption from Dr. Chen, and this consumption rate is expected to continue to grow. So this could be a very important sector to keep an eye on, considering if we continue to grow our livestock, we will also continue to emit. So there's very important considerations there. As far as California, we're also trending upward. And something to be mindful of in the China context is that the China Nutrition Society offers some guidelines for how to maintain a nutritious diet, and some of which it sounds like will help reduce methane emissions. We also heard about certain very interesting methane mitigation strategies for both livestock and rice. We heard about feeding strategies such as improving forages. We heard about how to produce more milk with fewer cows, which is a very interesting idea, especially when we are considering food security and the availability of land. We need to be able to match the population's demand for meat products while also making sure that the strain on our agricultural systems does not rise too much beyond our control. So it's very interesting to think about how we can produce more with fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And that brings me into rice as well. Dr. Nui talked about how China is working on increasing rice field while also reducing flooding and the greenhouse gases that go along with those practices. We heard from Dr. Coronado as well about certain strategies including intermittent flooding, switching to wet seeding and dry seeding, and other strategies as well. We heard about policies that shape methane reductions. We heard about the California general greenhouse gas reduction legislations, but also specifically Senate Bill 1383, which was the world's first policy that aimed to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, including methane. And that policy aims for 40% reductions below 2013 levels by 2030, which also aligns with the Global Methane Pledge, which calls for a 30% reduction below 1990 levels, I believe, by 2030. We also looked at policies from China. This includes the National Action Plan, which had mentions of methane emission reduction measures. The MARA, which I am forgetting what that acronym stands for right now, but it is the Agricultural Authority in China, has listed methane and rice reduction, or rice methane reduction as a top 10 item for to-do list for China Ag. Additionally, we heard about voluntary measures such as the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program and Alternative Manure Management Program, both of which are in California, hosted by CDFA. Both programs are spread across California. They offer technical assistance and help grantees in both applying for and managing these grants. And they also make sure to not accept strategies that would contribute to local air pollution or local hazards, which is very important when we consider these strategies of dairy digesters and alternative manure management. Additionally, what is interesting about these, or what I pointed out as interesting, is that the California Air Resources Board can help recover the cost of some of these programs in utilizing the low carbon fuel standard. So there's avenues for operators to make that money back as well. And China as well provides subsidies for biogas development. So there are several voluntary measures that can help farmers to implement these methane mitigation strategies. We also heard about the cap and trade program in California and how this is a crediting program that allows for certain activities to be credited under this protocol. And there are rigorous standards, and for rice specifically, we need information on soil properties, which can either be through modeling or direct sampling. But basically it sounds like that there are rigorous criteria to make sure that we can actually assert that there are greenhouse gas emission reductions. And additionally, some connection with that was Dr. Nui in her presentation explored the inclusion of rice in carbon trading markets in China. So that could potentially be a way for us to learn from each other. And I will end this concluding remark with some signs for future progress that I heard out of this conversation, such as the scale up of technologies. One that stuck out to me was the drought resistant rice that drastically reduced methane emissions that Dr. Nui described in China research programs. Develop strategies that reach smallholder farmers, where some of these strategies that we talked about today might not be so available. And how we might do that is rolling out pilot projects. We can build on our awareness of methane and how to reduce it by also engaging with these smallholder farmers, as Dr. Chen called for. And Dr. Nui also noted the lack of public awareness generally, so we can work better to educate people that are focused on methane and And we can also answer remaining questions about how to balance increasing yield while overall decreasing greenhouse gases. And finally, I'll end on a call that I heard from Dr. Nui for global collaboration. China and US have a lot of overlap, and it is very interesting to see how we might be able to work together.
Well, thank you, Caitlin, for that excellent summary, both the content and the action and cooperation going forward. I think that concludes today's webinar on reducing methane emission in agriculture in both California and China. This webinar and recording will be available on CCCI website shortly. I want to thank our panelists for the wonderful information and the policy insight they share with us. And we look forward to work with all of you in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.